Picture this. You worked 35 years. You saved carefully. You retired at 64 with just under $800,000 in your accounts. You lived reasonably, didn't go crazy, took a vacation or two, helped your kids when they needed it. And then you turned 75 and looked at the balance and something felt wrong. The number was lower than it should be. Significantly lower. Not ruined, not yet, but heading somewhere that scared you. This isn't a hypothetical. Variations of this story show up in retirement planning offices all across the country, so consistently that planners who've been doing this for 20 years have a term for the inflection point. They call it the 75 cliff. Not because everyone goes broke at 75, but because that's where the gap between what people planned for and what retirement actually costs tends to become visible enough to cause panic. And the panic is the second problem, because it often leads to bad financial decisions made under stress. The question I want to answer today is, why does this happen? Because it's not happening to stupid people or careless people. It's happening to diligent savers who did mostly everything right and still hit a wall they didn't see coming. When you understand the 5 specific forces that drive early retirement account depletion, you can take steps against all of them before you retire, or even after if you're already there. Let's walk through each one. Force number 1. Inflation that acts differently inside retirement than outside it. We talk about inflation as a single number, 3%, 4%, 7% in a bad year. But that average hides the pattern that matters most to retirees. Healthcare inflation runs at roughly twice the general rate, year after year. Housing maintenance and repair costs inflate faster than general prices. And the goods and services that matter most to older adults, prescription drugs, in-home assistance, assisted living, inflate faster than almost anything else in the economy. So what happens to an $800,000 portfolio built on the assumption of 3% average inflation when your personal inflation rate is actually 5 or 6%, concentrated in healthcare and care services? The portfolio erodes significantly faster than the model predicted. Year 1 looks fine. Year 3 looks fine. By year 8 or 9, the shortfall is compounding. By year 11, 75 if you retired at 64, the gap between what the calculator promised and what the account shows is alarming. This force is silent. It doesn't show up on any statement, but it's working against you from day one. Force number 2. Sequence of returns risk. This is the one that most pre-retirees have never heard of, and it's one of the most powerful forces in retirement finance. Here's the idea. Imagine 2 retirees. Both start with $1 million and both earn an average return of 7% over 20 years. But the order of the returns is different. Retiree A gets the bad years early. Market crashes in year 1 and year 2, recoveries in later years. Retiree B gets the good years early and the crashes later. Both average 7%. But retiree A, who was withdrawing money to live on while the market was crashing, runs out of money. Retiree B, who got the good years first while withdrawing, survives comfortably. The order of your returns matters enormously when you're withdrawing. During the accumulation phase of your working life, a market crash is a buying opportunity. You're putting money in. In retirement, a market crash while you're withdrawing is catastrophic because you're forced to sell low to fund your expenses, permanently reducing the shares available to recover when the market eventually comes back. Retirees who hit a major bear market in the first 5 years of retirement are dramatically more likely to run out of money than those who get the same average return in a different sequence. This is why the year you happen to retire matters, not because the market is bad for your overall portfolio, but because the combination of withdrawals and bad early returns creates a death spiral that even a recovery can't fully undo. Force number 3. The underestimated lifestyle creep of early retirement. This one isn't talked about at all in financial media because it doesn't fit the narrative of frugal retirees trimming back. The truth is that freshly retired people often spend more in the first few years than at any point in their working lives, and they're frequently surprised by this. The explanation is simple. Work takes up time. You're at the office, you're not at the mall. You're in meetings, you're not at the restaurant. When you retire, the hours that were consumed by work get filled, and most people fill them by doing things, which costs money. Travel spikes, dining out increases, social activities accelerate. Home projects that were deferred suddenly happen. Hobbies that were a weekend thing become a daily one. A retiree who budgeted for $75,000 a year spending often finds they're spending $95,000. Not because anything went wrong, but because retirement is more active and expensive than they modeled. That's fine if the plan absorbs it, but most plans don't. Most plans are built on the assumption that spending drops or stays flat at retirement. When it actually rises 20 to 25%, and nobody adjusts the portfolio withdrawal strategy accordingly, the account balance falls faster than projected in every single year. Multiply that across 10 or 11 years and you arrive at 75 with a number that's dramatically lower than expected. Force number 4, financial support for adult children and family. This is the most uncomfortable topic in retirement planning and also one of the most common causes of early portfolio depletion. Adult children in financial trouble. A divorce in the family that requires help. Grandchildren's school expenses. A medical emergency in the family that the parents step in to cover. Survey data on this is fairly consistent. A significant percentage of retirees, somewhere between a quarter and a third depending on the study, regularly provide financial support to adult family members, and almost none of them plan for it in their retirement budget. It's not that they didn't know their children, it's that they didn't want to plan for it because planning for it felt pessimistic or even disloyal, so they didn't. And then the call came, and they helped again, and by the time they're looking at a balance sheet at 75, the accumulated transfers to family members explain much of the gap they didn't expect. Force number 5. Healthcare costs that materialize faster and larger than any projection. This is the one most planners warn about, and still retirees consistently underestimate it. Here's the scope of the problem. Fidelity publishes an annual estimate of retirement healthcare costs. In recent years, their estimate for an average couple retiring at 65 and living into their mid-80s has been somewhere north of $300,000 in total out-of-pocket costs, not including long-term care. That's after Medicare. Premium costs, copays, deductibles, dental, vision, hearing. Medicare covers less than most people think. Add long-term care on top. Roughly 70% of people turning 65 will need some form of long-term care in their lifetime. The national median cost for a private room in a nursing facility is over $100,000 per year. In-home care for significant assistance runs $50,000 to $80,000. Assisted living averages around $50,000 to $60,000. A couple where both spouses eventually need 2 or 3 years of care is looking at $400,000 to $600,000 in care costs alone, layered on top of all other expenses. Almost nobody models this correctly, and when it materializes, and it usually does, the portfolio that seemed adequate suddenly is not. So how do you avoid all of this? Let me walk through the 5 corresponding defenses. Against inflation. Bucket your spending categories and assign different inflation rates to each one. Don't use a single 3% number. Healthcare gets 7 or 8% annually. Basic living gets 3 or 4. Entertainment maybe 2. Building these different rates into your withdrawal projections from the start gives you a more accurate model. Against sequence of returns risk. Build a cash and short-term bond buffer. 2 to 3 years of living expenses in instruments that aren't exposed to equity markets. This is the money you live on during a market downturn. You don't sell equities to fund expenses when the market is down. You use the buffer. When markets recover, you replenish the buffer from equity gains. This strategy, sometimes called a bucket strategy or cash buffer approach, dramatically reduces sequence of returns damage in most market scenarios. Against lifestyle creep, do a real spending audit for your first 6 months of retirement, not an estimate. Track every dollar. Adjust your withdrawal strategy based on actual spending, not projected spending. And build a 20 to 25% cushion into your early retirement budget rather than expecting spending to shrink. Against family financial support, have the conversation before it's a crisis. Decide in advance what you're willing and able to give, under what circumstances, and communicate it. It's an awkward conversation. It's also the one that prevents the gradual, guilt-driven, unplanned transfers that cumulatively hollow out a retirement account. Against healthcare costs, price out the real number for your situation, your specific plan options, your prescription costs, your area's long-term care costs. Investigate long-term care insurance, hybrid life and LTC policies, or a dedicated LTC savings account separate from your general retirement portfolio. And account for dental, vision, and hearing separately, because Medicare doesn't cover them adequately, and most retirees are surprised by how much these cost per year. The retirees who hit 75 with money still working for them aren't the ones who saved more. Often they're the ones who understood these 5 forces before they retired and built their plan around them. You can still do that. Whether you're 5 years out or already retired, the defenses are still available. The cliff is visible now. That means it's still avoidable. One thing I want to add before we close, because it's important and rarely discussed, the emotional dimension of the 75 cliff when it happens. The retiree who hits that point and sees the gap between expectation and reality doesn't just have a financial problem. They have a trust problem. They trusted a plan. They did mostly everything right, and the outcome doesn't match the projection. That feeling, the shock of discovering that the math didn't work the way you expected, is one of the most destabilizing experiences a retiree can have. It produces a kind of decision-making environment that's particularly dangerous, stressed, urgent, and vulnerable to the financial predators and bad products that specifically market to retirement anxiety. I say this not to add to the anxiety but to name the full cost of the 5 forces. The cost isn't just financial, it's the disruption to the sense of security that should be retirement's defining characteristic, which is exactly why preventing it matters so much more than responding to it. Here's how I'd frame the 5 defenses in practice for someone who's already retired and can't undo past decisions. You can't change what inflation has already cost you or what your early retirement spending was, but you can build the cash buffer today, right now, by moving a portion of your portfolio to a high-yield savings account or short-term treasuries. That buffer doesn't require selling equities at a bad time. It's built from rebalancing your allocation during a period when equities are healthy. You can have the family financial support conversation this week, even if it's overdue. You can schedule a dental appointment and a hearing evaluation and an insurance review. The healthcare defense is available the moment you make the appointments. And you can set up annual forward projections with a fee-only advisor or a good planning tool to catch any trajectory problems early rather than at 75. The 5 forces are running in every retirement right now. The only question is whether you've put the 5 defenses in place to counter them. Most of the defenses are available to you regardless of where you are in the retirement arc. The earlier you deploy them, the less damage the forces have time to cause. But even deploying them late is better than not deploying them at all. If you want to go deeper on the bucket strategy for managing sequence of returns risk, that video is already here. Drop a comment with the force that surprised you most. And subscribe. This is the kind of retirement planning content you won't find from most financial media. Here's a forward-looking observation that's worth closing with. The 5 forces aren't static. They're intensifying. Healthcare inflation is projected to remain above general inflation through the next decade by most actuarial estimates. Family financial pressure on retirees is increasing as adult children face a housing affordability crisis, student debt overhang, and wage stagnation that makes them more financially dependent on parent and grandparent support for longer. Longevity is extending, making the late retirement care cost problem more common and more expensive. And market volatility, the engine of sequence of returns risk, shows no signs of becoming more manageable for individual investors than it has historically been. What this means practically, the retirees who will be most financially resilient 10 and 20 years from now are the ones who build their defenses now, against forces that are only going to become more powerful. The cash buffer needs to be built before the next downturn. The healthcare reserve needs to be established before the care event. The family conversation needs to happen before the crisis call. The planning discipline needs to be established before the portfolio shows a problem. All of the defenses in this video are easier to build in advance than in response. The window when these defenses are fully available and fully effective is now, before the forces have fully expressed themselves in your portfolio. Use it.